Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to the Law, Your Money, and You. I'm Roberta Saphire, an attorney in Sharon, Massachusetts.
Hi, and I'm Camille Barron, a healthcare advisor and financial coordinator, also in Sharon, Massachusetts. And we are honored today to have a very special guest who is going to speak with us about her experiences as mayor of one of our cities in Massachusetts.
Yes, and I take great pride in introducing Mayor Yvonne Spicer. I met her several years ago at my nephew's house for a barbecue with my niece was there, and she was a guest of my niece, and everybody loved her. And then I heard she was running for mayor, so of course I had to get everybody I knew to say vote, vote, vote. But now this is the end of her term, and she's gonna let us in about different specialties of being a mayor of a new city. And I'll let her introduce Yvonne, Dr. Spicer, Mayor Spicer, lovely lady. Tell us a little bit about yourself. That's the way we start. So tell us a little bit about yourself, because I know there's a lot.
Well, thank you, Roberta, for that wonderful introduction. And you mentioned that it is the end of my first term, and I'm running for a second term too. So the nice thing about my life experience that brings me to this work is that first and foremost, I'm an educator, and I spent a number of years teaching middle school and high school, as well as being an administrator. I worked at the Department of Education on standards and assessments. And, I had a stint for a period of time at the Museum of Science in Boston. I was the vice president of the Museum of Science before becoming mayor. So, I've had a very wonderful career with a primary focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And bringing all of that to being the first mayor of this city has been a very interesting, but also rewarding experience.
And by the way, excuse me,
yes,
just want to mention you're the mayor of Framingham, Massachusetts.
Yes.
I don't think we mentioned that.
Yes,
Okay,
indeed.
go on.
And it's a new city. So I'm interrupting too. Framingham's a new city. And I got to say, I remember when at the barbecue and Yvonne was introduced to us as an educator, and she did this and that. And she says, and this is before they were talking about Framingham becoming a city. She says, I wish there was something more I could do for the people, because you lived in Framingham a number of years. And boy, it was just made for you, But go ahead now. Tell us.
Well, I have lived in Framingham for 36 years, and I left New York. I'm a native of Brooklyn, New York, and so I left college and armed with 2 degrees and off for my very first teaching job, and that was here in Framingham. So and I came for this job and to teach middle school, and and I never left. So that was the thing that I look at that is so rewarding, is realizing that this is a great community, and I got myself involved in some local government committees and boards, and so I've always been connected to this community and in one form or fashion. So and while doing my other job. So when you think about becoming the first mayor of a community, Framingham made the decision to transition from a town to a city, and it was a ballot vote, and it only won by a very small number of votes, like 112 votes.
When was that, Yvonne?
That was in 2017. And okay. So in 2017, that happened. And then on the ballot, so now on the ballot, you had to have a mayor, a city council, and have people run for these seats. And a friend said to me, Yvonne, would you ever consider running? And I thought about it, because at the time I was the vice president of Museum of Science, vice president of advocacy and educational partnerships. So I had a wonderful job. I felt good about the work we were doing around the world to move STEM programs. But I also thought about this opportunity. I thought about an opportunity to bring the best of everything that I had done professionally to this job, because I'd been in leadership. I'd started things from the ground up. And, what does it mean to build a new city? Who gets to do that? Who gets to create a brand new city? And And I thought I had a lot to bring to this community. And, you know, I ran a campaign with people helping left and right. People were behind me. And truly what the people wanted in this community is, you know, someone that was honest, that had integrity and, you know, and was not a part of the political machine of the community. And I brought all of those elements to this position. And I was very pleased. You know, it was a primary election, with 7 candidates in the primary, whittled down to 2, and I won the primary, and I also won the general election. Not the primary, but preliminary. They call it a preliminary instead of a primary because it's nonpartisan. And I won the general election with 59% of the vote. So, you know, that was a clear indication to me. People in this community wanted to see change. And so, of course, being in that role of moving a new city and the transition from town to city, but still focusing on some core elements, economic development, education, keeping our community green spaces and preserving those green spaces, and certainly climate change and all of those other issues. And meanwhile, helping the people see themselves as a part of this government. And that's all of the people of Framingham. So I've been juggling all of those different buckets. And, you know, and I think I've done pretty well with that. I'm pretty proud of where we are. We're still a new city. We're still learning and we're still growing.
Are you still active with the STEM education?
Oh, yes, absolutely. You know,
I was going to say, the reason I ask is because we sponsored an robotics.
Yes.
And then they said the STEM there. And I don't think they got much support around here. So it fascinates me that that's what you did at the Museum of Science. So I don't, and we only got so much time here, but I'd also like to hear about what projects and what you're doing to bring more.
First, you know, it's wonderful to say that there is the STEM Center that we have at Framingham State, and some of the colleagues that have worked with over the years started the STEM Center at Framingham State University, which is really wonderful. There's also a number of within our school department. There's a STEM elementary school, which is wonderful too, with a real targeted focus on building that capacity in STEM programming and making sure kids make connections in their learning. And that's the essence of STEM. Is
what are some of the topics in STEM? You know, I think a STEM cell, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, we have, I think we've come a long way in thinking about it. The essence of STEM is really, how do you bridge science, technology, engineering, and math, and how do you show the connections for people? And that's one of the things when I think about science and math content. It's content until it's applied to something. And that's where the technology and engineering comes in. How do you use those concepts of math and science and apply it to our everyday life? So, you know, that's one of the things I try to teach children and especially emphasize for teachers is when you're talking about STEM, it's important to make sure kids understand that it's relatable. For example, kids that like to play video games. So you play video games, but somebody had to design that game. Somebody had to use science and math knowledge to create that game. 3D modeling, all of that. How do you create the imagery? So I often try to take everyday items and connect the STEM dots for kids. And they're like, oh my goodness, this really is STEM. One program that I'm real proud of and my partnership with them over the years, even before I became mayor, is a company called iRobot. And they have long done projects, especially for girls in engineering and STEM and robotics. And so they're working with a local community group, which I love, called Discovering Hidden Gems, and providing girls with robots and understanding programming, how do you program the robots? And it's been a wonderful partnership that has been happening over the last couple of years. So
does that have anything to do with your robot that runs around the floor cleaning it? Or is that
yes, yeah, that's the same company that makes those vacuum cleaners. Yeah,
Aren't they out of Bedford, Mass?
They're in Bedford, right off of Route 3.
Something they're into that too.
Yeah,
Isn't that amazing?
So those are the kinds of relationships that, we're building. Same thing with life sciences companies. We've invited a number of new companies here in Framingham that have opened up shop, who are part of the life sciences and working on groundbreaking cures. The Sanofi is located here in Framingham. Another company that just opened last year called CRISPR. So we are making the dots, connecting the dots, not only to education in the classroom, but real work experiences in the community.
So if a local high school, say not in Framingham, but surrounding towns anywhere, wanted to be part of the STEM, because they're interested in robotics and their schools don't have it, is there, what is it? You said Framingham State office it, or?
Well, they have the Center for STEM at Framingham State. So I'm sure there are ways to connect other communities. And also what I find is that a number of communities have signed on to STEM programming, whether robotics competitions,
Yes.
challenges, design challenges. So there are a number of communities that are definitely doing some great STEM work.
You must feel so good, Dr. Spicer, we have to say, that you're part of this STEM research.
I feel wonderful because of, when I start to look at the path that my life has taken, I've always had a propensity towards technical things. And, even I remember when I was, 7 years old, and I was so fascinated by the blender, and I took it apart. I took a screwdriver and took it apart, and my father watched me do it too. And, and he just kind of encouraged me because I was so curious as to what was causing those blades to go around. So I always knew I had a focus on how does the world work around me. And I use those same skills being mayor today. I solve problems and challenges the same way. You take a design problem. What is the problem? What are the potential solutions you can implement? And you have to implement one, but you also know that no matter what solution you implement, there's a consequence. So what's the consequence of that? And then evaluate it. Did it work? Do you need to redesign it? So that I use that same, what is called the engineering design process in day-to-day solving problems as mayor.
What were some of the challenges you faced, Mayor, when you first came into the role of mayor of a new city, really?
Yeah, first of all, just think, you starting this job, there is no such thing as the office of the mayor. So I had to build a team. There was no office of the mayor. So building a team to work with me.
Excuse me, did they give you a room with a desk at least?
I did have a room with a desk. I still do. And, and so really building that core team in the mayor's office, and then looking at how we're working with our division heads, and most of our division heads that were already in place, they are still here. So this is my leadership team. And as I said to them, we're in this together and we're going to work together. And I have an outstanding relationship with our leadership team. They know I respect their work, their expertise. I rely on them to share their content knowledge as well as support me during, especially during this time of COVID, these last 18 months. I have never seen my team work so hard and they work so well together as we traverse the COVID in our community, which we were one of the hardest hit communities for COVID, but we have navigated our way through this pandemic, and with almost 70% of the people in Framingham are fully vaccinated. So we still have that 30% we still need to keep an eye on and try to work through this next the Delta variant and stay vigilant. We are really staying vigilant. Typically if you come into City Hall, you have to have a face covering. So I've reinstated that process back in our city. And when I keep looking at all that we have done together as a leadership team, keeping our city safe, keeping our city fiscally healthy. Framingham is fiscally healthy. We have AA2 credit rating. We have money in the bank,
Oh, excuse me, I remember when it was just built up, and my sister-in-law went and bought a new house in Framingham. They were just developing it.
Mm,
It was interesting how it just grew. You know, we watched it grow. And then they had that shoppers mall there where
mm,
people love to shop, and
mm.
a lot of stuff in Framingham. They had the first computer city, and the other one. I used to go ride to Framingham after work because it was the only places that had computers before Best Buy came. I'm dating myself. Before
Yeah.
Best Buy even was in existence.
Mm,
So you really, and you've been there all this time.
mhm.
You really were a forerunner when you took your first job there in an intermediate school.
Absolutely.
What is going to happen now with school just around the corner? Is there any kind of controversy going on regarding masks?
Question.
Well, one thing, our superintendent just made the decision to require masks to be worn for all staff and our students in school. And I personally think it was a good move to do that, and mainly because our students under age 12 cannot be vaccinated just yet. So we're doing that to protect them, but also protect ourselves too. You know, and it's a two-way street, and we have to ensure every possible measure is put into place so staff are safe, teachers are safe, as well as our students. And I think it's a very good move on the part of the superintendent, and one that I support wholeheartedly.
Mm. It's kind of rough in some other parts of the country,
Yes,
obviously, but I'm glad that it's not so much here.
absolutely.
You had mentioned something earlier on in your introduction about climate change and about the cities. You know, we know that in major cities, including Boston, there's a significant difference in temperature between living in the city, where there's a lot of concrete and few trees,
Oh,
versus living outside of that environment. Is that something that you're addressing in Framingham?
We are addressing, yes, sustainability, all of these initiatives, energy efficiency. I hired our very first sustainability coordinator, a couple of years ago. He's done a tremendous job saving on resources, but also as we think about climate change, we think about, stormwater runoff and runoff into our waterways, and how do we protect our waterways a little bit better than what we had been doing. The reality.
Camille and I had been talking, and part of we were doing a series on how did COVID impact your work, especially in the beginning, and how you're transitioning.
Well, first and foremost, I mean, I think COVID really dominated for the last year and a half of everyone's work. And here's the thing: you're fighting against something that you don't have all the facts or the pieces of the puzzle. If you remember early on, we didn't even have proper PPE and protective clothing and face masks and cleaning, sanitation. There was all of this bottleneck on resources. So we knew that testing was important to be done. We started to realize that social distancing was important to do. At one point, I had shut down City Hall in terms of people coming into the building, and pivot to working remotely in this building. And that was something that we were able to do because we had the resources in order to make it work. That took a lot of energy, and also every day learning about what's happening with the rise in our COVID cases. How many new cases did we have? What were we doing in order to get people vaccinated, which came a little bit later? We certainly targeted our older adults because they were being mostly adversely affected by COVID. So we really targeted a lot of energy on making sure, first of all, they're okay in their homes. They had food, they had shelter. We were making phone calls to them. And when the vaccine became available, they were our first line of defense with a vaccine. Our first responders, as well as our older adults, were put in line to get the vaccine. So fast forward now, the vaccine is readily available, the multiple sites in which we didn't have early on in this pandemic. And so we have our testing site. We had 2 testing sites in Framingham. We had a drive-through and a walk-up one. Vaccine, we're taking it right to the neighborhoods. In our community, we have a mobile van. Our clinic also gives vaccine. So we have access to plenty of vaccine. Pharmacies are working with us in this process as well. So we've learned a lot through this experience. I've learned more about COVID, and I am convinced my next life I'm going to be an epidemiologist because, the number of briefings that I have been a part of, including Dr. Rachel Walensky, who is now the CDC head. I've been on phone calls with her giving updates. She comes from here in the Boston area, and so was tapped to go to the CDC to direct that effort. And she's absolutely wonderful. So really listening to the science, understanding the science, applying the methodologies that need to happen. So you see how that engineering design process works even in this, in fighting COVID, and applying and testing. Is it working? And yes, it is working. We know that wearing face coverings, if you cannot socially distance, works. And even fighting this variant, we need to be mindful of wearing face coverings and when we're in public.
What are they doing about this talk now about a third shot? What are they doing in Framingham?
Well, we're listening to the data, and part of what's being stated is that those that have had a compromised immune system, that have underlying health concerns, probably should be getting a third shot sooner than later, with most of us getting a third shot by September. They're putting in a plan in place to be able to give people a third shot of whatever, if you had Moderna or Pfizer, you would get a third shot of whatever that particular vaccine you had, and just kind of focus on doing that.
I was just curious, do you go to like mayors conventions to see what this town's doing, what this city's doing? I mean, I don't think there's, I'm trying to think how many cities there are. Oh no, so you're Middlesex.
There are 40 mayors in all of Massachusetts.
Oh, that's a 40 mayors.
40 mayors in Massachusetts, because we have a lot of we have 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, but there are about 40 mayors. And, one of the things that was invaluable, especially throughout COVID, was the regular meetings with mayors and town managers. On Zoom, we would have regular meetings, sometimes three times a week. We were meeting and talking about what we're doing in order to mitigate some of the effects of COVID in our respective communities. On a national level, there is the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the National League of Cities. Certainly during COVID, we participated in a lot of Zoom webinars on certain strategies, on certain information around, how do you get information out to your community? How do you get resources that you need in your community, financial resources. Even now with the money that is coming to various cities and towns that are funded by ARPA, which is the American Rescue Plan, that was an initiative that was pushed by mayors and town managers to have money coming directly to those communities, rather having to filter through the state. And that was something that was very successful. Framingham is scheduled to receive about $26.9 million in rescue funding. So these are the kinds of relationships with the ones with mayors from across the country. And I literally will say across the country, I have been on calls with them talking about whatever they're doing in their respective cities, to mitigate issues around racial violence, and upheaval to COVID. So all of those things have been invaluable to me.
How is it? I know this is a touchy question for some areas, but how is it doing with the police? You never really hear about things going wrong or bad,
Well, I am extremely pleased that, first of all, I have a pretty outstanding police department, and I've had the good fortune to actually in my 4 years to appoint 2 different police chiefs. One retired.
Really?
And one was just hired in December and after going through a national search, I did select Chief Baker, who is the first African-American chief of police in the city of Framingham, ever. And he came from the ranks of a patrolman all the way through the lieutenant and deputy chief, and he's an absolutely wonderful chief, and he's very community oriented, and making sure that our police force is in the community. You will see police officers walking a beat in Framingham.
Well, besides our financial literacy thing, we do activity coloring books called Police Officers Are Our Friends. We've put out over 24 of them. But it's interesting, you don't hear about riots in Framingham and upheavals. Do you think there's a percentage? Do you know, I don't know if you would know, what's your percentage of older people, younger people? Like how many schools are there in Framingham?
Well, right now, our older adults account for almost 20% of our population, and we just got back our census data, which we went up about almost 6%, the population in Framingham, from 68,000 to around 72,000, a little more than 72,000 people.
It really grew.
Yeah, so it has grown by about 4,000 people over the last 10 years. And our older adults comprise almost about 20% of that population. So we are looking at, a community that we want to make sure that people can live in Framingham, but they can stay and age in place. Our schools, we just almost finished building our new middle school, which will open hopefully September. It will be ready to go come September. And a brand new middle school, it's been many years in the works to get this building done. And it's in its final stages. I had a tour of it last week, and it's beautiful. Absolutely.
It's exciting, all those different things. Like in Sharon here, this is a small town, but we get televised all over the country, if not all over the world, Brazil. And in Sharon, it was counted at the high school, 90 different nations represented. I was wondering how it is in Framingham, if you have any idea.
It's very similar, and that's the one thing. I mean, one of our top 3 languages that are spoken is Spanish and Portuguese, but there's Chinese, there's Mandarin. It's just runs the gamut of the languages that people speak in Framingham, and the diversity of our community. I mean, even as a former classroom teacher, I had students from around the world in my classes, and I always love that, and they were also a strong representation of teachers of great diversity. And so that's the thing. And in terms of our growth in the census, it was Latino people grew one of the fastest growing groups in our census data.
Yeah, in fact, the nationwide census data said the exact same thing, that the white population, the percentage of non-white people, diverse groups of people exceeded anything that's been in the past. And that's now, that was the majority of growth all over the nation. So I'm not surprised it's that way in Framingham.
It definitely is. And that's something Framingham people, if you ask them, what do they love most about Framingham? They talk about the diversity. They talk about the diversity of culture, the diversity of foods, having that richness in this community is an asset. I look at the houses of worship, whether it's churches or temples or synagogues. These are places that are people are in this community, and they are connected to our community. So, that's something that makes me smile.
We're almost done, believe it or not. I was just curious because years ago I worked on the city council in Boston. So you must have a city council there.
Yes.
How many councils are there?
11.
Really? 11's my number.
11.
That's interesting. Now, do they all have offices too?
Yes, they do. They get elected every 2 years.
I mean, physical offices.
They have one office, like the city council office, because their job is not full time. It is not a full-time job, and so they're not located in any particular building full time.
My last question is, how many people do you have to have in a town to try to get a city? Is there a
You
minimum?
know, it's interesting because it took several attempts for Framingham to become a city, and as I said, you know, it won by a small margin because you know, it's a delicate balance of trying to maintain small town values and in a city atmosphere that is growing and bustling. So you know, trying to walk that delicate tight line. It is pretty interesting to do that.
Well, like I said at the beginning, I welcome Camille closes. We thank you so much for being here, and we wish you all the success and luck and love, and you're just beautiful. And
Oh,
Camille
thank
winds
you.
up. We got less than a
Yes,
minute. believe it or
absolutely. It's
not.
been a joy to have you here today.
Mhm.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching today. If you have any questions about today's show, or if you have any ideas or suggestions about future shows, please let us hear from you, because this is your show, the law, your money,
Money.
and you.
And you.